Wow, this art that I got recently looks very ominous behind my head.
So Liz, we're waiting for Mindy and just Mindy, right? Do you have
Yeah,
quorum?
it's just Mindy and Laura. I'm going to give Mindy another couple minutes before we get started.
Okay. So apparently it kills the housing segregation meeting to start this meeting.
It did?
Yeah, because it's the same account.
Yeah,
So-
it ended that meeting ended right away, and
Yeah.
I had to find my way over here. Oh,
Yeah. So now we
right
know.
in the middle of when Allison was talking to. Very rude. Very rude.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. So never scheduled back-to-back committee meetings.
Okay. I emailed Mindy just to see, to remind her and to see if maybe something's going on. But we do have a quorum from what I can tell. I'm going to go ahead and get the meeting started. Okay. The Housing First Subcommittee of the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development has now commenced. It is August 31st at 4 p.m. The meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number to unmute to speak, dial star 6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, in order to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. I am going to go ahead and just take roll if everyone could just identify themselves and whether they're a voting or non-voting member. Corin, if you want to start.
I'm Corin Manning. I'm a non-voting ex officio member of the Commission on Housing and Equitable Development, Equitable Housing and Development. And I am planning administrator with the Department of Planning and Development Services.
Okay, and Mike, it looks like you're here as well as co-chair and voting member of the commission.
I am present, yes.
Are any other members of the commission present? Okay. Now is the time for the call to the audience. Due to open meeting law, only some of the items present, oh my gosh, due to open meeting law, only those items on the agenda will be addressed at this meeting. Action may be taken on any item. For meeting support such as Spanish language translation or sign language interpretation, please contact Ernesto Portillo. His information is listed in the agenda. Are any members of the public here for the call to the audience?
I guess that would be me, a member of the community, as a guest to the meeting today, Deb Nesbitt.
All right, Deb, I also saw that Joe raised his hand. Deb, if you want to go ahead, we'll get to Joe after you're finished.
What would you like to know?
This is an opportunity for members of the public to provide feedback or request future meeting items. If you don't have any feedback to provide, you're welcome just to attend as a guest.
Okay, so I don't know if there's a list I can be put on to be included in the email for this meeting, or if I just save what I have. I'm interested in finding out more about what the plan is for Tucson, in this area of homelessness and how to address this. I've been in Tucson now for almost 5 years, and I'm in a place now where I'm ready to find those places to get plugged in and whatnot. So I don't know if you want to know more about me or what I might bring to the party or what.
Deb, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in our chat for you so that you can track and monitor what's going on with the subcommittees and the full commission. If you give me just a moment, I'll do that while around the time that Joe starts speaking or when he's wrapped up, because I do have to pull it up. And there will be an email address that you can contact to be added to any listservs we may have.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Joe, your hand is.
Yeah, just real quick about accessing the meeting. I tried a couple different ways to get in here. There's one link that's on the agenda that doesn't seem to work, and if you go to tucsonaz.gov/HCD/CEHD, the link there to join the meeting isn't a valid one either. And I tested that on a couple different devices in a couple different web browsers, and had to effectively use the join the meeting link from the page and finesse that a little bit. So I know maybe the rest of y'all are getting links to this meeting from emails that are correct, but if you're in the public, it was a little difficult to get here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that feedback, Joe. I am emailing Ernesto to see if we can make sure that the recurring event link gets shared with the public. I think it's been going on for a little bit, but there's been a little bit of difficulty. If there's no one else who would like to speak in the call to the audience, I'm going to move on to presentations from Laura Sharp, who is the Housing and Community Development. I'm sorry, I don't know your official title, Laura, and I don't think that we have it listed in our agenda.
Lead planner.
Thank you so much. Laura Sharp, lead planner with City of Tucson, and Corin Manning, who is also with Planning and Development Services. Corin's here to talk about zoning and housing, and Laura is here to talk about an awesome mapping project that is regarding potential development sites. It sounds like possibly it would make most sense for Corin to go first and Laura to go after, but I'm open to either.
That's fine, because I'm not sure exactly what Laura will present, but it might be that getting an overview of zoning will help you understand how HCD is narrowing in on certain sites for affordable housing development. So let me just bring up some slides. I want to kind of just give everyone a little bit of like zoning 101 because there's a lot of terms that are shared, and hopefully this will give you some oops, background on what a lot of that refers to and how it impacts housing development. Can you guys see my screen? Okay. Great. So yeah, this is a little bit of zoning 101. Again, I'm Corin Manning with City of Tucson Planning and Development Services. I work in long range planning. And so we are always looking at a lot of our city's needs around housing, economic development, sustainability, and trying to balance all of those in how we grow. And one of the tools we have that is one of the it's a pretty powerful tool, but it's also a pretty blunt instrument, is zoning. And so zoning is basically a set of regulations. Most cities have zoning. And zoning regulates what you can and cannot do on a given property. And it basically divides the city up into different zones. And those zones regulate land use, the types of uses that are allowed, like residential, commercial, et cetera, as well as how that site can be developed, to what height, density, et cetera. And I'll give some examples of that. So some of the typical zoning districts that we have in Tucson are residential, R1, R2, R3, office, commercial residential, which is a mixed use district, OCR, industrial, and planned area development. And how those numbers work is typically R is for residential, and typically 1 is the lowest density in that family of zoning districts, and the higher numbers mean a little bit higher density. That's how that works. So this map is just sort of the downtown area so that you get a sense of how these zoning districts look in the city. So that red is commercial. You can see that typically follows corridors. When you see commercial strips around the city, Speedway, Stone, et cetera, those are usually commercial districts. And then neighborhoods are really covered by residential districts, maybe R1 or R2. Those are what most of Tucson's central neighborhoods, the zoning districts that most central neighborhoods fall within. So these zones, as I mentioned, regulate land use, and that's residential, commercial, like retail, offices, civic uses, so things like churches, schools, those are civic uses, and they're allowed in most districts. Industrial uses, that could be warehouses, could be manufacturing, and then mixed use. So we also have sites and buildings even that mix these uses, where you have commercial at the ground floor and residential above. So within all of the districts, I'm just going to go back to these, there's usually a range of uses allowed. So even though the district might be called residential, it allows residential uses as well as, an elementary school, a church, things like that. An office district would allow not just offices, but also residential uses. Residential uses are the most commonly allowed. They're allowed in almost every district. So a commercial district, these kind of layer on top of each other. A commercial district allows not just commercial and retail uses, but also office or residential. Some that are a little more, keep out a lot of uses are industrial for obvious reasons. So industrial districts usually allow just industrial and kind of commercial uses. No residential is permitted because it doesn't really play well with residential. These might be uses that have very early hours, lots of deliveries, might be emitting odors or fumes. It's not an area where people generally want to live. So residential uses are not allowed in industrial districts. Planned area developments it's kind of a build your own zoning district. So if one of these districts doesn't really work for the development that you have in mind, you can actually create a planned area development where you tailor the zoning to what you're trying to develop. If you're trying to mix uses in a creative way or have higher density development, that's what PADs are often for, planned area developments. So that's a little bit about districts. So they regulate use, they also regulate density, and those two things are separate. So you have low density uses, that could be low density residential, like a single family home. It could be low density commercial, a strip mall. Then there's medium densities in some of our districts. So that could be an apartment complex. In terms of residential use, it might be just a medium office building, something like that. And then we also have higher densities. So that would be downtown, you know, high-rise development, but it could also be something like Tucson Mall. Those are in our higher density developments. So land use density, and then zoning also regulates how you build your site, build out your site, and what it looks like. So we have a set of development standards that control what can be built on your site in terms of the height, the maximum building height, the overall density, the minimum lot size. This is very relevant for housing and residential uses. So your minimum lot size in most districts in Tucson is 5,000 square feet. In R1, which is our most common residential district, it's actually 7,000 square feet. This is a little table that's just a clip from our one of our overall summary sheets of different zoning districts. So you can see R1, R2, R3, what those regulations are. Parking is also regulated. So depending on the size of your development, you need to do X amount of parking. Lot coverage. So you have a 50,000 square foot lot. How much of that site can you actually build? Usually about, you know, maybe 70%, sometimes more or less. Setbacks from streets and property lines, that's something you also have to take into account. There's usually pretty substantial setbacks required on our main corridors and from your property lines, especially if you're like a commercial use adjacent to residential, you need to set back from that residential use. Open space, landscaping, things like that. So all of these standards that you can see in this table work together to control what you can actually build on a site. So taking all those into consideration is how you get at your actual site plan. You have to put the setbacks down, and then, you know, what's the height and all of that. And you're usually, that really constrains in some cases your building envelope and the building form that you can actually develop. So what are some potential barriers to housing development? As a city, we know we have a lack of affordable housing and housing in general. There's a major shortage of housing in Tucson and our state at the moment. So why haven't we been able to produce enough housing or to keep up with demand? So much of the city is zoned for R1 or lower density areas. This doesn't allow multifamily development. So multifamily development, which is apartment complexes, are typically only allowed on corridors. And there's limited land that has already been entitled or already has the zoning in place to allow multifamily. So most of the time, if you're doing a multifamily development, you probably need to go through a zoning process, an entitlement process that can take a bit of time. Infill, which is, you know, using land we already have within our urban core to redevelop that, or redeveloping a strip mall. That could be types of infill. That can be very challenging due to some of our standard zoning regulations, i.e. minimum lot size, parking, etc. Minimum lot size is a really key one because that really affects the overall density and how much housing you can build on a site. And many of the tools to facilitate denser development take a bit of time and involve more layers of review and approval. So as I mentioned, multifamily is one example. If you just want to build an apartment complex, you might have to go through a rezoning. Some of our other tools that I'll mention on the next slide, they also take more steps. So what are some of the tools we already have in the city of Tucson to support more housing development? One is a tool called flexible lot development. This allows for basically a subdivision to modify some of our density regulations and minimum lot size regulations. So if you want to do a development that instead of that 5,000 square foot minimum lot, you want to do 2,500 or 3,000 square feet, you can potentially do that through a flexible lot development. You can also increase the density somewhat on your site. In exchange, you have to provide some open space, but it is a way to support higher density development. But you have to go through a design review process, hold a neighborhood meeting. There's a few other steps. More steps than just a standard subdivision that is done in conformance with existing zoning. Another tool is our overlays. So we have a tool in the downtown area and along the streetcar called the Infill Incentive District. And then we have a similar tool along a couple other corridors called urban overlay districts. And these are really designed to promote transit-oriented development, more housing and jobs along our transit lines. And these do allow a lot of modifications of zoning in terms of reduced parking, reduced setbacks. It allows you to do almost 100% lot coverage development. So you can see this example here of the Marist. That's a affordable senior housing development downtown. You can tell their building is not set back. It is coming all the way to their property line. That creates a more urban feel, a more pedestrian friendly environment, but it also allows them to better utilize that site and build more housing units rather than if they had to step back. It allows for modifications of height and some other standards. It also does involve a neighborhood meeting, a design review process, a committee meeting. So there's more steps involved in utilizing those overlays. Planned area developments, I mentioned that before. This is used for a lot of subdivisions around town. So if you're building, a new residential subdivision, this would often be the way people do it because it allows you to vary those minimum lot size and things like that. Accessory dwelling unit ordinance, we just adopted this not quite a year ago in the city of Tucson. So this is a new regulation that allows one accessory dwelling unit or backyard casita on any residential lot in the city. So it's a way of allowing a little more infill and more residential units. So those are some of our existing tools. But I know the commission is interested in what else can we do as a community to support more housing development. And this is something that the Affordable Housing Subcommittee of the commission is also talking a bit about. And they have some ideas on potential changes to zoning, and then not just zoning, but other tools like financial tools to support more housing development. I'm just going to talk about the zoning. So one option they've discussed is adding an affordable housing incentive to the infill incentive district or our urban overlay districts. This is something we're already working on. We just established our first urban overlay district with an affordable housing bonus last year on the Sunshine Mile corridor. That's the Sunshine Mile district. That's the new overlay on Broadway from Euclid to Country Club. So that does include an incentive for affordable housing. And we're now updating the infill incentive district, which is the district that covers our downtown area. And we're looking at adding a similar incentive, a density bonus in the IID for projects that include affordable housing. So that's one zoning tool. The Affordable Housing Subcommittee has also discussed doing a broader code audit of Tucson's zoning code. This could look at things like incentivizing more affordable housing through density bonuses and other zoning flexibility, reducing the minimum parking, reducing setbacks required for affordable housing so that it's easier to build affordable housing. Also looking at opportunities to facilitate more infill development. This could be through zoning changes that allow more flexibility with respect to parking, lot size, etc. So those are some of the things that can be barriers to infill. So there could be some tweaks to our zoning to make that easier. And then I mentioned before the flexible lot development, that is one of our existing tools to promote denser development, but it was really intended for new development, kind of edge development, where you're trying to preserve open space features and clustering development. That's actually what it was originally called, was the residential cluster project. And it wasn't really designed for infill as much. And now we're seeing people trying to use that FLD for infill. It kind of works, but has led to some challenges. And so one option would be to create a second version of the FLD tool that is really geared more towards urban infill and those needs, and allow for smaller lot development. So this is an example of a project that was able to use the FLD, even though it was not necessarily the easiest, but it was just a 4-lot development, definitely not affordable. But this is the type of infill that with some tweaks for FLD, I think we could make much easier in Tucson. These were on pretty small lots. There were some bungalows in Armory Park. So those are some directions we could think about going in Tucson, things the commission could consider, this subcommittee, the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, and then as a commission in terms of things you might want to support as zoning tools to support more affordable housing and just more housing in Tucson in general. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Corin. That was great. Does anyone have any questions for Corin? Go for it, Mike.
Thank you. I've got a lot of reading to do. Thank you, Corin. I have a question here. High density residential. I put a question mark after that. But I cannot formulate the question that I had at the time. So let me ask you this, and put this in perspective a little bit for you. I'm from the East, so I'm used to houses being, together. And I came out here in 1980, and I realized people like their space, that it's that kind of thing. But are Tucsonans horribly against moving housing closer together, housing structures closer together? Is that been a history that I just haven't caught on to? I mean, I understand I like the open space too, but trying to think about creating more affordable housing, more housing, et cetera, et cetera. How does that play? How has that played out over the past 40 or so years since I've been here? What's the opinions?
Yeah, great question. I think you would get a lot of different answers. But I think if you like density, you are living in the right place. Because Tucson House is one of our best examples of higher density development, one of our tallest housing developments in Tucson, if not the tallest. And so, but that's one of the few examples of that kind of density for housing. I think that other kind of densest housing we've seen recently is student housing, like around Main Gate. We've seen a bit of height there. And then as a community, I think it's really mixed. We do see some, denser apartment buildings downtown, definitely, and a few other parts of town. But I would say Tucson's approach to, denser housing is usually just 3-story courtyard apartments. That's more typical here. But you do see those across the city in every part of our city. We have a pretty large stock of that type of a rental apartment housing, around 3 stories. So it is mixed in Tucson, I think. But yes, I think the approach here and the overall kind of design style is much lower density. We are a pretty auto-oriented city. We like low profile development to enjoy the open space, enjoy the sunsets, all the reasons, the mountain views, the reasons people live here in Tucson. So I think it's always a balance of those things.
What's the temperature currently? Is it pretty much still the same? Like, don't build it too high, don't build it too,
I think we've heard different things. I think people really have understand kind of the approach to higher density along transit. And I think that makes sense to a lot of people. This example of the Marist, it's 6 stories, but along transit. I think that has kind of worked. But outside of our downtown urban core, not so much. We don't see much beyond 3-4 stories.
Because my mind is, well, my attitude is this: if the city has a plot somewhere, wherever, and it's not being used and we can use it, we can put some affordable housing there, then let's do it. How high? Well, whatever we think, but it's going to go up. That is my attitude. I don't know how that flies politically.
Fortunately, Laura is going to be talking about opportunities for development in her presentation. So if you have no other questions, Mike, I'm going to move on to Deb, who has her hand raised. Awesome. Thank you, Deb.
Great, thank you. And this may be something you guys have all talked about before, but because I'm getting educated on these things, help me out. What is the procedure if an area was developed for like the little mini houses, or taking, say, a hotel that could be converted for temporary transit housing, helping people transition from homelessness to provide some safe housing while services are being offered to them to get them back on their feet, whether they live there 6 months, 9 months, a year, something like that, but something that they're not going to stay there, but it's an area that has a lot of services that can be packed into a small area to help folks, get off the street, get the services, get on their feet and move on. So can you talk about that? Is that doable? Do our ordinances and things allow us to do that?
Well, so I think some of that is tricky because it depends on the exact balance of housing and services. But if it is a shelter, like a homeless shelter, that can be very challenging. Unfortunately, our zoning doesn't make it easy to locate that in many parts of the city. So yeah, locating shelters is very difficult.
All right, Joe, it looks like you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just real quick, kind of in response to Mike. I've been through kind of some of the processes that Corin's talking about between Fourth Avenue development and then also being in touch with Rincon Heights and Jefferson Park on recent projects that have been worked on there. So if you want kind of some firsthand like citizen non-planner opinions on that kind of stuff, I'm always open to that and let you know. I feel like when you're taking the temperature, most people are okay with their neighborhoods evolving a little bit. I think people want development to be contextual and not to be a drastic change is the big one. That when if you're in an area and you see those kind of 3 or 4 story apartment buildings, if somebody comes in and says, hey, we want to build a 13 story and a 7 story right over here, that it kind of doesn't match with what the rest of that neighborhood is, that people live in a neighborhood and have looked at zoning and said, I know it's allowable to build and we kind of live here because this is a thing that we want. That kind of development gets a lot of pushback. And I think that's what we've, that's what we've seen, even down to like 6th and Campbell, that project in Rincon Heights recently. But most people, if you've got 3 and 4 story apartment complexes in there and you say, yeah, we want to go 5 or 6 stories, there's less pushback that the community has really started to engage, especially over the last, maybe 15 years or so, has wanted to engage and say, yeah, okay, let's talk about that. How can we make that a really good project that fits in with our neighborhood? There's a lot more acceptance, I think, for affordable housing than there used to be. A lot less pushback on that as not being a locally unacceptable land use, that people want that. So I think there's some improvements there, and the feeling in general, if I had to give it a temperature, is kind of lukewarm. But if you're engaging with the community and bringing a contextual development that people really think is going to help affordability and help diversity in their neighborhood, lots of people are seeing that as a really good thing, and I think that's good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. I see that Kyle made a couple of comments in the chat, and just so that it shows up in our meeting recording, I'm going to go ahead and read some of it off. It looks like he said that he volunteers with Tucson for everyone. I'll add to Mike's question by saying that it depends on how people think of land ownership. Some people buy a house and are excited to see their neighborhood grow with new shops and amenities. Some people feel they've, quote, bought into a certain neighborhood character. If they bought a single family home, they will oppose others building duplexes / bungalows nearby. Kyle's also seen that people resistant to change tend to be landowners, people already pretty settled in. I think they're starting to change their mind as they see their kids and grandkids struggle to afford housing due to the shortage and are willing to adapt changes if they don't feel too drastic. Thank you so much for that, Kyle. I do have a couple questions myself, and then we'll get to Laura's presentation. So Corin, I was wondering, how are these land use districts drawn, and does the city have any sort of periodic redistricting period?
That is a great question. Most of the zoning districts date to like the 60s when Tucson established our first zoning, our initial zoning. A lot hasn't changed since then, but there is a process to change your zoning. Any property owner can request a rezoning, and we process many rezonings every year. So usually this is to facilitate a specific development. If you're a property owner, on Grant Road, and you're in an office district that doesn't allow commercial use and you want to do commercial, you would request a rezoning so that you could do that. Rezonings have to be in conformance with the neighborhood or area plan, if there is one, and with our general plan as a city, which the general plan lays out kind of a conceptual growth map for the city. So you can request a rezoning. Whether the city goes back and ever alters these boundaries, yes and no. We've been doing that through overlays, really. It's hard for the city without that property owner requesting it to change zoning for legal reasons, but what we can do is create another option for that property owner. And these overlays that I mentioned before as tools for housing development, the infill incentive district and urban overlay districts, those are optional districts that actually kind of overlay over base zoning. And a property owner can choose to utilize those districts. So it's basically providing another development option. So that's been our approach when we see like this zoning isn't really working anymore. We can create an overlay that allows for development that better meets current needs of the community. So that's what happened in downtown as we were planning for the streetcar in 2013. There was this recognition that we're gonna be making this huge, $100 million, $200 million transit investment. We really want the density and development to support ridership and make this really a great part of Tucson. So at the same time, we created that infill incentive district or kind of revamped it to make it more functional to allow the type of transit-oriented development that would support that transit investment. And that's the infill incentive district that we have now is basically a result of that process.
Thank you so much, Corin. If no one has anything else, I'm going to move on to Laura and her presentation. Thank you so much, Corin.
Thank you.
I
Thanks
really
for having me. I'm
appreciate it.
happy to share this and this material and happy to visit anytime to talk more about zoning.
Sorry, I'm not used to Zoom, so as soon as I share my screen, I've lost everything. Can you all see my screen? Yeah, cool.
Yes.
So I'm Laura Sharp. I'm a lead planner at HCD, and even though my title is planner, I'm primarily a data visualization person. So I am taking the information about zoning and priorities on where to locate things and translating that into tools that HCD staff can use to figure out where they should be putting new developments. So one of the things that I think that you all might be interested in is this real estate opportunities tool, which is an index of around 8 different variables where we're measuring whether a location is in certain desirable or undesirable areas. So is it in an airport environment zone? Is it in a wash? Is it in a qualified census tract where you'll get certain, I actually forget what a qualified census tract the definition is, but it's areas where at least 60% of the population is below the area median income. Is it in a zip code where the Arizona Department of Housing will give you more points to be in that zip code? So we've taken all of these different factors and calculated a score for every parcel in the city based on how it stacks up with these different criteria. And we've mapped that here. So you can see that blue, the score is standardized between 0 and 100. So dark blue means those are the parcels that meet the most criteria. And the orange is parcels that score the worst on this index. So then you can filter this. So you can say, I only want to see parts that score 60% or higher. And then you can say, I only want to see zoning that is OCR 1. And that might take a second to filter because it's slow going over the sharing my screen and processing all of the data at the same time. But you can see that we now have just the parcels that meet that. And you can see over here, it's filtering too. It's a really long time. So just 13 parcels meet this criteria of a score of 60 and OCR 1. Then you can click on one of those parcels and learn more about, what's going on at this parcel and why did it score the way it did. So you can see it's not in an airport environment zone. It has a high revitalization area score, so it must be close to one of our areas where the city is focusing efforts to revitalize that area. And then it's really close to transit, so it gets a high transit score. It's not located in a wash. It is in one of those zip codes where it scores well for the Arizona Department of Housing for LIHTC funding. And OCR is one of the highest scores that we assign to zoning. So it also scores high on zoning because we're looking to prioritize mixed use residential options. Yeah, so that's the tool. And so this is primarily focused on where should we buy land, for new developments. And along with that, we're also focusing on creating a housing opportunity map. And what makes this different is that this is focused on what do public housing residents value in housing, what is considered an opportunity to them. And so we'll be combining the scores of this map with the real estate app so that we can say not only, is this lot practical for us for development purposes, but does it actually meet the needs of the people who we are, hoping to live here? And this is kind of a long process, but I'll try to go over it quickly. We interviewed public housing residents to ask them what they value in their locations where they live. And you can see this is the survey we use. So they have to compare multiple things. Is it more important to be close to a school, quality schools, or to a grocery store? And then by how much, how more important is that? And so we asked them tons of questions about different variables. And the reason we're doing it that way is because we wanted to get numeric values so we can map those. So once we have those values from the survey, we enter them into an analytic hierarchy process spreadsheet, and we get these weights. So the different weights of what each individual resident valued in these sort of mobility, do they want to be closer to bus stops or to bike infrastructure? Do they want to be in an area with a lot of jobs, or do they want to be in an area with a low poverty rate? So they had to compare all of these and we get these scores. And these are the results of all of the people we talked to. And so then these scores, these averages at the bottom, will be taken into a map and used as weights to create a similar map to the real estate app, where you'll be able to filter it by a score. And the difference is that these scores will be, weighted according to someone's opinion rather than just their locations. And so some of the data that we are including for these comparisons are quality schools, which is from the Great Schools data set. And you can see this is the location of what are considered above average schools, where are grocery stores, public libraries, parks and recreation, where are hospitals. This is environmental hazards, so pollution, tree canopy, crime. So this is 2020 crime incidents. And that turned out to be the most important thing actually to public housing residents was crime, followed by grocery stores, and then quality schools. And in mobility, we're looking at streetcar stops, bus rapid transit stops, bikes. That one's going to take a second to load. Walkability, so how difficult is it to walk around? And then we have drivability, and so working on that. And then jobs and diversity. And again, it's not loading because of the amount of data I'm putting over the internet. But jobs also was one of the most important things that we heard from residents. Yeah, and so that hopefully will be out soon in the next few weeks. And I will be happy to share the final tool with everyone so you can check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. This is amazing. Does anyone have any questions for Laura?
Just a quick one, and you may not have an answer, Laura. I don't know if I should say this, but I will. I actually was a respondent on this survey, and I'm just real quick. So when I heard the question, depending on exactly how it was worded, I had one of two ways I was thinking about answering the question: for myself or my community. So did that come up in your surveys?
Yeah, so I tried to tell everyone to answer it for yourself. And that was the instructions to the interviewers. Because we don't really want someone to try to guess what other people want or feel. If we wanted to just take stabs in the dark, we could do that ourselves. Yeah.
Okay, because I just remember there were
for yourself.
Yeah, well, I did, but there were a couple of questions where the way they were phrased, I wasn't really thinking about myself, and I had to kind of try to figure out how I should have answered it. But it was just a curiosity of mine.
Okay, yeah, and the questions, some people have kind of commented on the questions being a little bit awkward. And I can explain that when you look at the hierarchy process, it has to do all of this matrix algebra on the back end to compare everything to each other. So the only way that it can work is if everything is a series of comparisons. And that, it comes across as a little awkward for people, which one is more important and by how much. But you have to have that numeric value of weighting, like public libraries are this much more important, 3 times more important.
Yeah, see, those questions are clear to me because it says, what is more important to you? But there were, as I remember, there were some that didn't really specify to me, you know what I mean? So.
All right. Well, so we are taking, yeah, I'm open to feedback because this was the first time doing this, and we definitely have some lessons learned on how it can be improved.
Okay, thank you.
Laura, I have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
So first of all, this weighted scheme is super interesting, and I am curious if the geographic location of the residents was taken into account with the weighting scheme, or was it completely anonymized?
No, it was not taken into account. We did record it, and I did notice some trends, but we're not incorporating that into the analysis now. What we could do is create separate results depending on where the person, depending on the types of respondents. So you can see, looking at the results, that these people all valued grocery stores more than schools. And so these people all lived in multifamily units, Craycroft Towers, Martin Luther King, and Tucson House. And they're not going to prioritize schools in the same way that these people here, who are in the single family scattered sites, really emphasize schools more than grocery stores. That's the clearest trend that I saw.
I can definitely speak for my experience working with people who live in those areas, which is that Craycroft Towers and those other locations mentioned, with grocery stores being a priority, are in food deserts. And so it's probably a priority because it's a gap in what they are able to access. So I personally would be interested in any geolocation information for these respondents to do a gap analysis and opportunities to develop in that way.
Sure. So you want the locations of where the person who, the scores for each person, like based on where they're located?
Yeah, I mean, even just like the development and then the number of respondents and then a percentage of, their identified needs. It may be that that's an opportunity also to look at the commercial development and mixed use development a little bit more.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And when this is available to the public, is there going to, well, okay, I should ask this question first. Is this for development by the city or private developers? Is that what's the target audience?
This will definitely be used by the city. So this will be used for the asset repositioning. So where do we want to get rid of housing that we own, and where do we want to purchase new housing? And it will also be made available to the public for developers that are looking to receive funds through the city. And that will go into part of their scoring. So, it'll be one part of their application. Did your, development lot score high on our index? But it will be just one factor for that.
Okay. And I know that for LIHTC applications, a lot of these topics are brought up as being priorities for a LIHTC application to be approved for that state tax credit. Is there going to be any sort of training opportunities for developers to learn how to use this tool so they can have a more competitive application?
I don't think we've planned that, but I'd certainly be happy to do it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, Corin, as well. I'd like to take a minute to discuss with members of the subcommittee about potentially trying to continue to distill this to an opportunity maybe to partner with the Housing Affordability Subcommittee to make a recommendation to Mayor and Council regarding future zoning. Does anyone have any thoughts about that at the moment?
Other than I'm for it.
Something specifically actionable that I think would be useful would be to maybe request some agenda time for the full commission meeting in the future, so that possibly we can discuss requesting that a temporary committee or special session be held so that we can review zoning code over a period of time and make specific recommendations to Mayor and Council. All right, so I'm not able to attend the meeting tomorrow, but if another member of the subcommittee wouldn't mind speaking about what occurred at today's meeting, I took some notes. If you want me to email them to you, I'm happy to do that. And I'd like for someone to make a motion regarding that specifically, or we can table it to the next full commission meeting, whichever you guys think is best.
Could you state the moment, the motion, and I can support it?
Yeah, so I think the motion would be that the full commission request special sessions or another subcommittee in order to review Tucson ordinances and code regarding zoning and make formal recommendations to mayor and council.
I so move.
I'm the only other voting member, so I second.
Okay.
All right. Mike, if you could present that motion tomorrow, that would be very much appreciated.
Okay, not a problem. Send it to me, Neil, because my handwriting is so addressed. I'm jotting it down as you're speaking of.
No worries.
I can figure it out, I think, but.
The next item on our agenda is next steps. This includes items for future meetings and our next meeting date and time. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know that we do have a recurring meeting invite, and I already emailed Ernesto about trying to make sure that we get the correct Zoom link or maybe a new Zoom link that'll work for the public. And that is set for Wednesday, September 28th from 4 p.m. to 5. Does anyone want to bring anything up as a future agenda topic?
I don't know if there's going to be future agenda, but there was the housing segregation subcommittee meeting happened prior to our meeting, and I was in that one. And there was a commentary about these two subcommittees working together on a specific item. So can I suggest that you and Jay chat about that, or because he had some specific? Okay.
Yeah, and I do want to let you guys know that I do have a speaker lined up for our September meeting already. It's going to be one of the representatives from Tucson YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. They're going to be talking to us about what YIMBY means and what the commission and subcommittee could do to support YIMBYism, if at all. I'm saying if at all, in case there's objection. I don't object to it. I'm the one who scheduled it.
No, it's fine.
Does anyone have any other? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I was just saying, yeah, I'm with it.
I also have a meeting with Tucson Tenants Union next week to see about them joining or participating in some way in our subcommittee. And that's it for me.
Yeah, I'm for that. I've been trying to find some time to connect with them on your behalf, but I didn't get it done, so I apologize.
Thank you. Joe got us connected, and it's been a lengthy process, I have to say. They must be very busy people, which I understand. It's a busy time of year. Okay, well, if there is nothing else, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Bye.